Hi everybody. So we're going to have a look in more detail at analysing language in this video. Language is assessed in paper 1 and paper 2. In paper 1 it is question 2 and it relates to a part of the fiction extract that you are given and it's worth 8 marks. In paper 2 it is related to one of the non-fiction extracts, part of it, and it is worth 12 marks. And it's question 3 in paper 2. But the example we're going to look at today is for paper 1, fiction. And if you would like it, if you think it would be useful, feel free to comment and let me know if you want me to do something similar for a non-fiction extract. I've intentionally chosen, I've got lots of these short texts that replicate the sort of section that you would be looking at for language. So I've just picked one at random and we'll look at it together. Now, in terms of what language relates to, I often am told when people have looked at, when they've attempted mocks, for example, that there was no language and they couldn't find any language. Now, the story wouldn't exist if there was no language. So there is language. What students usually mean when they say there's no language is that techniques such as similes didn't jump out at them. And I'm going to hopefully show you that that's not just what you can look for and what you can analyse where language is concerned. So that you can look at sentences. And there are 3 different types of sentences. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but if you feel as if this is an area that you need to know more, feel free to comment and I will do something in more detail on that. But what's very important is that you do not obsess about knowing how to identify techniques and features. It's good if you know them. It will elevate your marks slightly if you know them, but it is less important than why the writer is using the language that they are using. So 3 types of sentence: simple, compound, complex. Then word classes, that's the function of words in a sentence and includes nouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositions, adverbs. But the ones that are usually the most effective within a sentence, the most interesting, are the verbs, adverbs, and adjectives. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Also, techniques. So all of these 3 things combined are known as language features. Techniques are devices, linguistic devices used by writers. There's lots of them, hundreds of them. You're not expected to know them all. And as I say, I wouldn't stress about trying to memorise as many as possible, because then you will be too focused on that and not focused on analysis, which is where marks are awarded. So I use this acronym POSHIMP that I came up with during the time when everyone was watching Game of Thrones. It's really just to help you remember the most commonly used language techniques that you find in fiction, but also is helpful for you to then remember to use them yourself in the writing question. So we have personification, onomatopoeia, similes, hyperbole, imagery, metaphor, pathetic fallacy. Now, you've got an extract here. This is about the same length of what you will get. It's usually just 1 paragraph in paper 1 that they ask you to look at. But the first thing you should look at is the question. It will always say, how does the writer use language to do something? In this case, it's to describe the setting. Now, it's quite a broad question, that, because the whole paragraph is about the setting. So it does give you more to look at. But if it was specifically about to describe the rain, for example, that would then mean you'd have to choose quotes that are specifically about the rain. But I'll discuss that as we go through it. So the first thing is read it. Don't even think about trying to find techniques. Just read it. And then anything that jumps out at you, anything that you think that's interesting, or you could imagine it, or it made you feel a certain way, those are the quotes you should be highlighting, because that means your analysis will be more effective and more detailed. The rain poured down so hard that it seemed that it was dancing spray, every raindrop contending with its fellows for supremacy in the air and waiting to splash down. It was a deluge. The drains and sewers were overflowing, throwing up, regurgitating, as it were. The debris of muck, slime, and filth, jostling and gurgling and hurrying towards the overflowing and always hospitable river, bursting its banks, bubbling and churning like some nameless soup boiling in a dreadful cauldron, the river itself gasping like a dying fish. Now, first thing, what overall, when the language is combined, what image is the writer trying to portray? What atmosphere are they trying to create? And overall, this seems to be quite a negative image. We've got lots of negative vocabulary. Deluge, contending for supremacy. Hospitable river is a bit more positive, as is dancing spray. But then when that's combined with muck, slime and filth, throwing up, regurgitating, those are the words that make the entire paragraph seem as if the rain and the setting is being portrayed in a negative light. So now we've got that in mind, we almost have a general effect. So that makes the effect part of your analysis easier. But then think, yes, but which words and phrases really created that image? Now, the very first interesting quote is, it came down so hard it seemed that it was dancing spray. Now, dancing always has positive connotations, so it's worth looking at. Doesn't mean you have to, but it's quite an interesting phrase. And then, every raindrop contending with its fellows for supremacy. That really presents this idea that the rain is fighting against something. So I quite like that. It was a deluge. Now, it's a good word, deluge. It's an interesting word, and it's one that you could use in your own writing. But even though it jumps out because it's a short, simple sentence, there's not a lot you could say, because the word deluge pretty much encompasses exactly what it is: a lot of water coming down at once. But we'll highlight it anyway. The drains and sewers were overflowing, throwing up, regurgitating. That is a really disgusting description. So because it makes me think, it's worth looking at. Then, debris of muck, slime and filth. Does not sound nice at all. Jostling and gurgling and hurrying toward the overflowing and always hospitable river, bursting its banks, bubbling and churning. So we've got, can you see these words here that all end in ing? You can see a connection between them. If there's a connection, if you recognise something that joins words together, highlight them. And then, like some nameless soup boiling in a dreadful cauldron, we've straight away that jumps out as being a simile because it's got the word like in it. Also, gasping like a dying fish. So we've clearly got two similes there. But don't just highlight similes for the sake of highlighting them, because some similes are boring. Some similes are not really worth analysing. These are quite unusual ones, and also they do create a picture. A dreadful cauldron makes us think of witches. So it makes it more interesting. But don't just, for the sake of it, go for similes because you can recognise them. So we've got quite a lot highlighted there. Then what we need to do is choose our best ones. It's only worth 8 marks. We only really need to look at 2-3 quotes, really. So we can pick and choose which ones would be the best to look at. Now, because these overflowing, throwing up, regurgitating seem to be linked to debris of muck, slime and filth, you could combine those in the same analysis paragraph. Also, these ing verbs, jostling, gurgling, hurrying, bubbling, churning, you could talk about those in combination. And if you are looking to push your mark even higher, When you see words that are connected, that usually means that they are part of the same semantic field. And a semantic field counts as a higher level language feature. Semantic field just means groups of words or phrases that are of the same category. They create the same idea. So a semantic field of a classroom, for example, would be pens, pencils, students, tables, desks, whiteboard. All of those, if they were in a text, would create this semantic field of a classroom. So that's something that you could look at. So I've got all of these highlighted. Now I need to think about how I bring it together. Now you may have been shown an acronym to help you remember how to complete your answer. You might be using PEE or PEAL or PEARL. It doesn't really matter. I use PEARL just because I find that it helps you really push up your answer. And there's also some suggested sentence stems here to help you. But what you should be able to see is the analyse bit is bigger than any other part of the response, because that's where the majority of the marks are. And then if you find acronyms are restrictive or confusing, or you forget which one you're supposed to use, just use questions. Basically, the question itself is asking you how. How does the writer use language to describe the setting? So that is already telling you that they want you to say what kind of language is being used and how is it being used. So you could use a question or 3 questions to help you. So in this question, what is the writer doing to describe the setting? What are they actually doing? So what features are they using? Where is the evidence? Quote from the text. And then why are they doing it? What is the overall effect? What's the intended effect? Are there any alternative interpretations that you could provide? So with that in mind, we will write a basic response to this. Now, what I want to try and show you is a level 3 response and then how you could push it up even further. So we'll look at the drains and sewers were overflowing. The first thing I'm going to do is name what it is. Now, in the exams, quite a stressful environment, you could forget. All the features fall out of your head and you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to ruin this. I'm not going to be able to do it. That is not the case, and don't worry about that. You will lose a mark, 2 at the most, for not naming a feature. There's more marks dedicated to how you look at the effect of the quote that you've chosen. So I'm going to pretend that I don't know any features here and show you how you can still make it effective. So the writer uses disgusting vocabulary to describe the setting. Always start with a point. Even if you don't use PEARL or PEAL, always start with a point. Never start with a quote. If you start with a quote, examiners dislike this because you're not making it clear to them why you picked that quote. Why is that quote relevant to the question? So even if you end up saying the writer uses language to describe the setting, it's still a point. If you can name the feature, you may as well put it in here. So the writer uses a simile, a metaphor, a triplet, anything. In this, as I say, I'm going to pretend I don't know what it is, so I'm just saying disgusting vocabulary because that's the image that it portrays. This is shown in the quote, and always put your quotes in quotation marks because it makes it easier for the examiner to mark it, to identify which is your writing and which is the writing from the text. So this is shown in the quote, and there we go. Now the next bit is to say, what does that quote mean? Now you can do this in 2 ways. You can say explicitly what does it mean, so tell us what the words mean, or you can dig deeper and think about what is being implied. Why are those words being used? So we'll start off with a basic, this means the river, the rain has been so heavy that it's caused the drains and sewers to overflow. Now, if you want to try and elevate it further with some inference, and that's where the higher marks start to come in, then use these openings this suggests or this implies. So this suggests that I'm going to embed another quote here. The filth is spilling out and running down the streets. Why? So be thinking why. Why would the writer use that kind of description? There's lots of ways they could have said that the rain is heavy, but to say that it's so heavy that this is happening and to describe it in such a way means they're trying to disgust us. So then you say that. This makes the reader feel or think or imagine disgusted as we can imagine. All of the, let's be explicit here, all of the contents of people's toilets falling out. Now, that's already sufficient. You're already thinking about why language is being used. But you can go deeper to really get into that level 3 band by zooming in on particular words. So, when the words throwing up and regurgitating are used, it is really disgusting as it creates the idea that the overflow is so bad that it's vomiting human health. Regurgitation. By the way, if you see a word, you don't know what it means, and in the glossary at the bottom they've not included it, that implies that they think you should know that word. If you don't know that word, you don't know that word. Don't try and analyse a word that you don't know what it means, because chances are you will assume something and be wrong. There are some words that you can read around it and guess what it means, but I would just, if you don't know what regurgitating means, just focus on the throwing up bit, because most would know what that means. To regurgitate keeps coming back up and back down again, without being too visual there. It's vomiting human filth everywhere. Now, you will have been told to always link, and a lot of people struggle with it. They think it's harder than it is. The question is asking you how language is used to describe the setting. So just revert back to that. Even though you've said it in your opening, it doesn't matter. Or you can link it to a theme if you think a theme is being portrayed, or an overall image. You could link it to the context if you think that there's something related in the context. Or you can link it to another quote. It's not worth stressing about. The link is less important, but it does kind of tie up your answer in a nice bow at the end. So this presents a horrible setting overall. There we go. So this will, if we had a couple of these, because we're only looking at one quote really, this would still get us into level 3. But how do we get higher? How do we really focus on dissecting a text? So I've done this one already, just to show you. I did do it live originally, but the video didn't work. So here we have, trying to make it a bit more objective here by using the name of the author. And it's always in the text, so use it. It just makes it seem as if you're being more critical in your analysis. So Pratchett, and this time I'm naming a feature. Pratchett uses a triplet to describe the setting, with the sewers overflowing, throwing up, regurgitating. There's three things. It's a triplet, you might call it a rule of three or a triadic structure. Rule of three, triplet is fine. This means the rain is causing the sewers to overflow and implies that the rain is overwhelming and the sewers cannot cope with such a deluge. What I've also done here is what's called embedded the quote. So instead of saying, we can see this where, or this is shown in the quote, instead, I actually include it within the sentence. So Pratchett uses a triplet to describe the setting with the sewers overflowing, throwing up, regurgitating. And again, this is rewarded in the mark scheme. They feel as if it's more of an essay response. The phrasal verb, so I'm zooming in on those words again, but this time I'm identifying what they're called. Again, if you don't know, just say the word. The phrasal verb throwing up connotes to vomiting, which presents the sewers in a vile and visceral way. Now, that is a little bit of opinion I'm putting in there, and I'm also using some advanced vocabulary. This is not necessary, but if you do use it, sometimes you can kind of dazzle the examiners a bit. When this is combined with the verb regurgitating, it also suggests that the sewers are taking in and spewing out their contents. This creates a very strong, disgusting image where the rain has had such a negative impact on the setting that we can imagine the putrid contents of the sewers running down the streets. So this just pushes it a bit further. Now, as I said before, you could talk about how words are combined to create a semantic field. So let me just show you how you could do that. Get rid of that. And this is where you would combine some of the quotes together. So if you identify a semantic field, you have to say what the semantic field is of. So the writer uses a semantic field of, what could we call this? Disgusting imagery. The multiple negative verbs throwing up, regurgitating. Now, if you know grammatically what kind of verb it is when it ends in ing, say it. But if you don't, again, it doesn't matter. Throwing up, regurgitating, bubbling, churning, overflowing. There's lots of them, jostling, gurgling, etc. Because by doing this, you're telling the examiner that you recognise that all of this was intentional, that the writer chose on purpose to use a lot of words that all end in ing. And then give their overall impression, but then again, zoom in on individual words. So these, the multiple negative verbs are all combine. And as I've also embedded the quote there. And then let's change that to Pratchett. All combine to create a we've said disgusting already, horrible image of dirt and feces spilling out due to the excessive rainfall. Which one's interesting? What should we look at? Bubbling. We've also got some alliteration there, bursting, banks and bubbling. But I wouldn't necessarily look at alliteration because when you do that, you are not looking at the impact of the words. You're looking at the impact of the repetition of the sound. Now, if you know about sounds, then you could talk about the fact that the B's, the repetition of the B's, are plosive, which is quite an aggressive sound. Again, it's all additional knowledge. If you don't know it, it's not a big deal. The bubbling implies the doesn't really imply, but it means suggest the river is now full with the putrid contents of the overflowing drains and sewers, which makes us imagine. You don't always have to say the reader either. You are the reader. Us. Try to avoid I, because then that's less objective. Which makes us imagine the impact this would have on wildlife and also the appearance of the river. Therefore, this effectively creates that word again, visceral, setting. There we go. So we could talk about the semantic field. In this case, it's been quite difficult, I'll be honest, trying to think what the semantic field is. Sometimes it's more obvious, but I'm just trying to show an example of how you combine semantic fields. Now I have lots of texts that are short like this to show you, fiction and non-fiction. So as I said at the beginning, if this has been useful and you think that you'd like to see something similar using a different text or using past papers or looking at non-fiction, please let me know. Thank you very much.